Hi, folks. Thanks a million for tuning into today's webinar. Today we're going to be focusing on, getting back in the game and getting contact ready. We're going to look at some of the things in and around training load and managing of that. It's a hugely important thing that we have to be mindful of, and we're very lucky to go and have some experts from various IRFU departments on the call today. We're going to have Nicol van Dijk, Caithriona Yeomans, Patrick Dolan from our medical and athletic performance departments, and then we've got Jamie Turkinen from coach development coming in to ask some questions and to tease out some more coach related questions towards the end. Just before we get into that, and I take a wee breath and a break, what we're going to do is just remind you, there's a lot of excitement currently. There's new government restrictions being changed and different guidelines coming into effect over different times. We do implore you, please make sure that you're fully aware of your jurisdictional government guidelines at all times when going back to rugby. If you need any update on that, we will be constantly refreshing and updating all of our guidelines on www.irishrugby.ie. We'll have some more press releases coming out over the coming weeks, which will guide you. And we'll also have a number of webinars, which I'll go through towards the end of today's session, to just go and prepare you in any way we possibly can for getting back on pitch with your players. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to to Nicol van Dijk, who's going to go and get us started.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I know we're all getting back to our lives. The sun's out here in Dublin, so appreciate that you're giving up sunny lunchtime to join us for the session, and we look forward to sharing with you the third installment of the series of webinars that we were looking at going back to the game. And as Colin said, looking at when you are ready, when the restrictions are lifted and you're able to go back to contact training. Patrick's going to share with us some input from how to prime your players for that. I might just mention that most of this content has been will be available in our Engage program, rugby readiness program that we're going to launch later this year in September. This content will be freely available for everyone. We will be looking to do training sessions with coaches and players as it is appropriate, and hopefully we'll do that in person. So we're looking forward to sharing that with you. But lots of what we've discussed so far and what we will discuss today will form part of this program. This will be available to everyone. So we're really excited about launching this a little later, and please keep an eye out for announcements around that. Today, Patrick Dolan, he's a PhD student at the University of Limerick, working in the Irish Rugby Injury Surveillance, or the IRIS study that many of you will be familiar with. Patrick's been nominated as a Young Coach of the Year over in the States, so we're very, very fortunate to have him as part of our team. But before he really digs into those coaching skills, and that's really is for coaches, but important for players if you've tuned in as well, we're going to ask Caithriona to just give us a reminder of why this is so important, about where we are now and how to ensure that we are ready for, we were getting back to where we want to be, but apart from getting back, we have to remember that this might be a longer season as well. So we need to keep those workload components in mind. So Caithriona, why don't you kick us off and get us going?
We do need to remember that it's been a particularly long period with no structured or regular training for many of our players. So the players that we had before lockdown and before COVID may not necessarily be the same players that are returning to us over the next week, or maybe already back in training, depending where you are in the country. So it's really just to re-emphasise the fact that we want a phased return into competition or contact training, so that we can try and make sure that our players, now that they are back up and running and able to go training, that they can maximise their enjoyment of it for as long as possible. And the one way to do that is to make sure that we keep them playing safely and injury-free. So really, to emphasise that point, this was something that we discussed in one of our previous webinars, and it's just a suggested guideline over how the next few weeks you can try and introduce different skills and drills in a controlled way to protect our player welfare. So looking at controlled contact development coming in before our team contact development, and then potentially some limited game time over the next few weeks. And if we look at how we might help control that, when we talk about load, it's how much work we're doing with our players, and it's not just necessarily rugby, but also we have to think with the groups that we have, they could be in school or work, they may be getting ready to sit exams at the moment, and these are all factors that will continue to add to their load, in addition to even other sports that they are looking at. So using a really simple scale, such as the rate of perceived exertion scale or the RPE scale, just to check in and have that moment when you're seeing, is the session that you've planned, is that matching up to how the players are feeling it's taxing them, or how they feel physically prepared for it? And again, these slides will be shared with you afterwards, so you can see just even a suggested target of how you might plan the next few weeks of your training and how much you want to build up into pushing our players a little bit harder from where they begin with us now. And as I said, one of the biggest factors that will prevent them from enjoying their rugby at the moment is unfortunately an injury. And given today that we're going to be talking about getting contact ready, we're going to focus a little bit about contact injuries. So we know concussion is one of the most common injuries in both our male and female players across the game. And we can see here that nearly 50% of them in both cohorts are due to tackling somebody else. So if we think about that, it's really important that we try and build our players into getting ready to accept contact, but also into our tackle technique over the next few weeks to try and minimise these injuries. And not just to focus on concussion, we can't forget about our high rate of ankle sprains, knee sprains and hamstring injuries that we also see. And if we look at our injuries overall, we can see that in our men's players, this is the IRFU data from 2017 up to 2020. We can see that the rate of tackling is the same as being tackled. So the ball carrier getting the same amount of injuries as the tackler. Whereas in our women's game, we can see that actually the ball carrier was sustaining more injuries than the tackler. So just important considerations as we try and prepare them to get contact ready again. And if we look at how a season progresses, and as I said, this is based off of a normal season. So after a normal period of no rugby, pre-season training and coming into the start of a season in September, we can see that the first 3 months there, so the September, October and November of a season, tend to have the highest rate of injuries. And not only that, but in our female players, we can see that the majority of muscle injuries and ligament injuries, so 60% of our muscle strains and 60% of our ligament sprains happened in those first 3 months. Whereas in our male players, we can see that 50% of our fractures and dislocations were occurring in those 3 months as well. So again, if this is what's happening in a normal season, we need to err on the side of caution, because we don't know how the coming season is going to progress after this really long period of lockdown, because it's not something we've ever had before. But if these are the types of injuries we see generally at the start of a rugby season, we need to, I suppose, use a little bit of common sense and expect that these may be things that we see coming in over the next few weeks, and what we can try and do to how we prevent those. So now I'm going to hand over to Patrick Dolan, who's going to talk you through some of the work that we discussed in our previous webinars, and then what we're going to be talking about today, which is our primers for contact.
Yeah, thanks, Nicol, Kyle and Caithriona for the introduction, and for sharing obviously that valuable information as far as injury rates, and really just not so much cautioning, just making us aware that as we do get out to the pitch, that we just take proper fundamental precautions and practices in what we apply, and that's obviously what I'm going to go over here today. Very simple and easy to talk about injury rates, but very different in practice. But at the end of the day, what we're going to go over today is just very fundamental and basic in what a best practice warm-up or preparation period should look like ahead of a training session. Not so much in particular because we're now just getting back, but even as we do get back, what best practices and fundamentals should always be in place ahead of a training session. So if you were able to join us in prior webinars, we've already gone over some of the 3 phases that would be considered to be involved in this 3-phase structure of a best practice warm-up or preparation period. In total, we're looking at about 15 minutes. Certainly in early periods, or maybe as we return, some extra time could be devoted towards, say, the S&C or preparation side of things before getting into the rugby specific drills. But that dynamic preparation, that more team involvement, is just your kind of setting the mental state and getting the players prepared from a general heart rate standpoint, lining them up across the try line or the touch line, 15-meter grid, and we've already reviewed maybe 10 to 15 different movements that could be involved there. This period takes no more than 3, 4, or 5 minutes at most, and we're actually going to introduce a couple of skipping movements today that we hadn't yet previously gone over, because we're also going to do some speed mechanics today. Following this 3, 4, 5 minute period of team warm-up, we'll go into some individual muscle activation. We've already introduced this in prior webinars. These are your squat patterns, your lunge patterns, some basic human movements that are really good to just get that full range of motion and joint activation throughout the body. And then specifically today, we're going to go over some primers towards the end of that preparation period or warm up, and really make sure we're ready for that intensity through contact and some high speed running. So some of these primers, what they might look like, super basic, but right after that individual muscle activation, where we finish our squats, our lunges, that 3 minute period, we just want to get a little extra devoted time to the shoulder and upper body, good range of motion, and obviously just working on good mobility, stability, and proprioception around the shoulder. So this is just a really quick series, arm swings forwards and backwards for 10 seconds each, some arm swings with some internal and external rotation, rotating the palms, and then some overhead reaches. Again, takes no more than 20 to 30 seconds, but just to make sure before we get into some of the more specific activation type exercises. Here's our first activation. Really basic crawls, knees are off the ground, really good demonstration here on trunk control. So he's staying squared. If you were to put glasses of water onto his back, he's not wobbling or spilling that water anywhere. Here's a forwards backwards demonstration, but you could obviously go lateral left to right, again, just to work on some different proprioception there around that upper body and stability. Moving on, what you might do after, we want to increase some of the tissue tolerance or increase some load, obviously, before we get into contact. And you'll know that in our training load webinar that we did last week or 2 weeks ago, in addition to Nick Winkleman's presentation around training load and a lot of those considerations which Caithriona just referred to, we also went over some strength exercises that could be implemented even now during the continued lockdown before return to the pitch. And we went over some press-up progressions as far as sets and reps, and maybe how to regress depending on if you're a younger or say just a school-aged athlete or player just starting out. So now that we have our upper body activated, we're ready to go. Obviously, we want to have fun. So we've worked on shoulder stability, we've worked on joint range of motion, but at the end of the day, we're here to play with our team and have some fun and get ready for this. So this is just a really, really good way to add some intensity now. Really good at focusing on core strength. Again, adding a ton of shoulder stability and a lot of fun, obviously, here. So focusing on keeping those hips squared. And I have sets and reps as far as work to rest ratios here, but anywhere from 15 to 20 seconds is usually pretty good. And making sure that we're obviously trying to compete a little bit at the end of the day. So that's just one exercise. I'll go over 2 more briefly here. We're all familiar with partner pummel to lift, so I won't spend too much time going on this, but this might have 2 components. There might be just a lot of technical review as far as engaging the hips, whatever shoulder is contacting, keeping that front foot forward, and just going through maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds in a more controlled setting. And then on the coach's go or the whistle, then obviously we might try and get a little bit more competitive and wrestle, trying to get both arms underneath and hopefully getting that one player off the ground and competing to win that rep. Again, that might last 10 to 15 seconds. And on the slide, you'll have seen some recommendations on sets and reps there as far as work to rest ratios. And then the third one, obviously we want to start to get the ball involved. So this is one of my go-to ball and partner exercises. Again, work to rest ratios recommended there, but roughly 15 to 30 seconds. Instead of just engaging the body, that defender or tackler can really start to force a lot of footwork and force that ball carrier to be creative. So really trying to attack more of the ball and forcing that ball carrier to use more of that arm to defend. And again, applying a lot more stability and proprioception around that shoulder. So those are just 3 really good primer contacts that also include the partner to get more people involved and obviously engage a lot more fun. So if we just review quickly, we have our team dynamic warm-up. That's pretty much your high knees, your skips, your butt kicks, your leg swings. That would be kind of phase 1 of the preparation period, 4 to 5 minutes. The next period, 3 to 5 minutes again, some muscle activation, your squats, your lunges. And then that third phase, I really like to kind of split up between those primer contacts and then just a quick dose of some acceleration or high speed. And so that's what we're going to go over just right now. And so this is just our A skip march. Again, fundamental and basic. A lot of you have probably seen this, but this video demonstrates perfectly what the technique that we're looking for. You can see his good high knee drive, his arm swing engaging his core. Most importantly, I would say his foot contact. So if we look at his foot contact, really good mid-foot strike. He's not up on his toes. He's keeping his feet striking underneath his hips and so forth. Pretty basic, but we can always include that in our first dynamic warm-up team phase. Now we have just our normal A skip. I like to just say a 1-2 punch, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 to kind of get that rhythm down. A lot of the younger athletes, for maybe parents or younger school age coaches that are on, you might often see same arm, same leg, fundamental, but really important to just reiterate these basics as we return to the pitch. It should be opposite arm, opposite leg, engaging that core, squeezing those hips on contact into the ground and so forth. And then that third skipping progression, again, all that could be incorporated in that first phase of the prep period is just our A skip to pop off. A lot more force production, a little bit of a plyo now to increase that kind of intensity and elasticity before we go into our acceleration, which I'm going to show us 2 drills right now, or 1 drill, I should say, and 2 videos. So really good demonstrations here. Our first one, and you'll see up there in the top right-hand corner of the slide, again, some basic recommendations on how we can return, say, the first 3 weeks back to the pitch, maybe weeks 4 through 6, and then what our in-season could look like as far as distance, sets, reps, to really just optimize and not spend too much time. But if we look here, he's got a great shin angle. He's got a great trunk lean. So great trunk angle, a lot of distance. He's kicking that toe out nice and far, and he's not just shooting upright right away. He's only going a 5-meter rep. So once he gets to that 5 meters, he's obviously starting to decel. But great trunk lean, good core. And if you notice, he's really striking underneath his hips there during that slow motion one. So that's what a really good acceleration one. And again, that might last from 5 meters out to 10 meters before we start to focus on our more high speed running. 2 more skipping progressions on maybe a speed day. So those were 3 skipping progressions on maybe an acceleration day. Now I'm going to just give us 2 skipping progressions or a high knee running drill before a high speed day. And these will be the last little videos that I share with you. So 3 on the pause. It's your general high knee, but with a lot of force contact, getting that knee up, making sure that heel is underneath that hamstring. We're not kicking that toe out like in our acceleration as much. We're going to get a little bit more of a cyclical motion out of that knee. And then I'll go on to what the next one will be. Obviously, our typical high knee run. So that's on the pause. And then here we have our normal one. Now, what I love about this one is how many reps he gets in. How many times is it high knees or butt kicks and they're only maybe getting 3, 4, or 5 yards? Make sure, reiterate right away as soon as we get back to the pitch, some good discipline as far as how many reps we're getting, and it's quality over speed. Reiterate the basics, the fundamentals, and the mechanics. Don't just call out an exercise. So things that we're looking for here are lots of repetitions, good quick arm swing, good tall trunk posture, and striking in through that midfoot. So now how do we carry that over to just some high speed running? Generally, acceleration will be anywhere from 5 to 10, maybe 15 meters, and then over 20 to 40 meters would be more of our high speed running. So here's a normal rep. That's actually not sped up. That's normal velocity. Here's it slowed down. Again, striking underneath. He's not overstriding. He's striking right through that midfoot. He's staying up tall. You can see his upper body's fairly loose. We want to try and relax that upper body a little bit, but really get a lot of strike and force through that lower body. And then the last video here, just a little bit closer up. Again, really noticing that foot strike underneath, not overstriding onto the heel, keeping that good tall eye, chin out in front. So those are just some basic, obviously fundamental structure as to what it should look like. 15 minutes is plenty early on. Be patient and allow that extra 5 minutes for really a lot of teaching, a lot of learning on the player side of things, and a lot for the communication, as Caithriona and Nicol already shared. Get an idea for how much high speed running on the front end is enough, or maybe the players say, you know, I think we could handle a little bit more. So communication is really going to be key throughout these first weeks. As far as engage, Nicol already pointed out to this, and I just want to finish with this. This engage program is going to be available for everyone, you know, this coming autumn and this coming season. There is also going to be a really, really unique opportunity to be part of a lot of the research that's going to go into really assessing how effective this program is and how it associates with a lot of the injury reduction that Caithriona already pointed to. And we're really going to look to the clubs that have already participated in our AIL with our IRIS project over the last 3 seasons. And so we're going to look to them to be leaders, but we're also going to reach out to some other clubs in the AIL to hopefully participate. And these opportunities, or the clubs, will also have access to hopefully some more resources as far as what proper preparation should look like, and some other exercises that players can kind of keep themselves accountable on their own offside of the pitch, knowing that we are limited in time. Even outside of COVID, 2 training sessions a week is usually pretty limited for a lot of the S&C side of things. So that's all I have, and Jamie, I'll pass it back, and any questions, happy to answer away.
Thanks, Nicol, Patrick, and Caithriona. Caithriona, I'm going to come to you first just with a couple of questions and get a wee bit of consideration around that. So you mentioned earlier in previous webinars that we've had a long period of no structured training away from our clubs and our schools. But now we're in a situation where we have players that are just returning to the pitch. We've got players that have had a few weeks of training on the pitch under their belt. How important is it to ensure our players have an appropriate lead-in time and build-up before starting to implement the contact elements of the game? And also your thoughts on the notion of catch-up.
That's great. Thank you, Jamie. It is hugely important, as we said. We can see in normal seasons, if we want to call them normal, the rate of injuries that we would have. And this is a completely unprecedented time that we find ourselves in. So it is hard to predict what might happen, which is why we have to just err a little bit more cautiously than we would previously and gradually build people back up into it, because some of your players may have trained during lockdown, some may not at all. Some players may have now transitioned from an age grade into a senior setup, or, you know, from minis up into another age group. So we really have to focus on trying to let them have fun, get those skills, those rugby skills back gradually. And the fitness will come through playing the sport. We don't need to try and get them running massive drills in the first week back just to try and catch up on their fitness, because it will just come through them playing and getting back into normal parts of the game, and the fitness will come back over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Caithriona. And just one other to top up on that, and bearing in mind that we have had a sustained period away from the game, but also for our players, all sports. So when we talk to our players, they play multiple sports across the board, and a lot of that's starting to come into play again. For those that do undertake multiple sports, do you have any advice for them and maybe their parents over this next period of time when we're starting to reintroduce ourselves back to training?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie, and thanks for bringing it up. I was actually only in my own physio clinic there on Tuesday evening, and already I had a 14-year-old in who had played hurling and soccer on Monday. He had rugby on Tuesday and was hurling again on Wednesday. So I think today was going to be his first break away from any organised sport. So I think it's important for, you know, maybe parents on the call here or coaches on the call to check in with their players or check in with the parents and see what other sports are these, you know, young people playing, or what other activities are they involved with. Are they in the time of sitting exams at the moment? And just get a feel for what other load is being put on them during the week, so we can try and tailor what we're doing. And potentially, you know, in some local areas, you may know the coach of your hurling team or the local soccer team as well. So why not touch base with them and see how many sessions they're planning on doing with these cohorts that tend to cross over 1 or 2 sports.
Thanks, Caithriona. Some really good advice and insight there around how to manage this next period of time. Patrick, I'm going to come to you now, and thanks for that great insight on the examples of primary activities that we can consider and our coaches can consider when looking to reintroduce our players back to the contact elements of the game. As the players undertake these activities, these primary activities, have you any advice or suggestions for coaches as to how they could benefit or use this time to benefit the overall training session or environment, and then maybe the further education of their players?
Yeah, sure, Jamie, thanks. And just to reiterate again, as Colm said earlier, to make sure that these, as we implement these drills, they do align, with the guidelines in place at the time. But yeah, I think as we do return, whether it's at first for non-contact or eventually for contact, being really patient and understanding that mastering the basics regardless at what level, whether it's learning the basics or just continuing to master and reiterate them as we do return to the pitch at maybe our higher and AIL levels. But really being patient and focusing a lot on teaching and the education side of things. So for a lot of the coaches out there that maybe don't have the S&C side of things, being able to reach out and access this Engage program now gives them that expertise or that resource to not just maybe add a bronco or a conditioning session just because that's maybe how things have been done in the past, but really focusing on the quality. And additionally, I guess I would say in the early weeks as we do return, really focusing on the physical preparation side of things. I think we've been obviously off the pitch and off the field for a long time now, so we're really excited to just get right back into it. But really being, I would say, smart about how we do progress, whether that is in our conditioning, whether that's in our timing of rugby drills and so forth. So have a plan and don't be afraid to back off a lot the first few weeks and simply just communicate back with the players following it, whether it's through RPE or simple dialogue, but education and making sure that we understand the technique behind what we're doing, as opposed to just throwing a plan out in place is going to be really key as we return.
Can I add to that, Jamie?
Yes, Nicol, jump in.
Yeah, Patrick makes those great points, and I think for all the coaches involved, and we've done like the IRFU and the webinars you've presented have focused on this in the past as well, but if we think about their body and minds that are developing as they're coming back, we need to make sure they're training in all those ways. Also think of them in the people sense, in the development of these young people, of your players across all age groups. What other stresses are in their lives, what other opportunities are they pursuing, and make sure you're attentive to players that are perhaps going through a period that may not be easy. And identify the leaders in the team. Get those players that will help to guide the group, and make sure you spend a little time with them. And then I think the other thing that we tend to forget maybe is the place. So our rugby environment, we're all coming back to our rugby environment under these unique circumstances. So keep your environment in mind. There might be some excitement about that. Players may be really eager. There might be a little bit of fear even. So try and address those concerns and make sure we're following our guidelines, but also really paying attention to all those little cues you can pick up from your team, from your players, that will ultimately aid you in providing them with the best possible training and development that we can. So I think the body, mind, place, people, to keep all those in mind is a really important part of the coach's job now as we go back.
Thanks, Nicol, and thanks, Patrick and Caithriona, for really good advice and considerations for our coaches and our players and our parents as well as we return to the game in our varying stages and we look at how we best progress our players and ultimately get back to playing and having fun playing the game that we enjoy and we love being part of. Colm, I'll hand back to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks, folks. Yeah, look, just some absolute gold there that we can go and utilise and bring into our own sessions. There's always nuggets there that you can go and take out. I suppose some of the things that I would have brought out myself from that, being obviously, I know Caithriona alluded to it there, is that you're future-proofing, you're understanding why your players are coming back. So is that fun? Is that to get back with that social interaction? And where are they going next? So are they going to be moving between mini and youth and adult? And we actually have a number of webinars coming up on that. So if you go to www.irishrugby.ie, you can go and register for those, and they'll focus around, I suppose, the motivations of players as they move in those transition points, and just some of the things we need to be very mindful of. I was really interested and to hear the depth that Patrick's speaking about, in some of his cues when, he's naming things, and I think it's really important that we understand what we want the players to get and how to get that message across, and then to come to what Jamie's saying is that, and Nicol as well, is that being mindful. So there will be extra stress on players, on coaches, on people coming back in this time. So we need to be very mindful of that fact and to make sure how we're speaking to players, how much patience we're having with each other. We can go and ensure that we actually be that little bit more, as I say, patient and mindful in what we're doing and how we're actually laying things out. One of the key things for me is fun, and Patrick, you showed the exercise with the you were saying that you could put 2 glasses of water on someone's back. I'm not saying glasses, but definitely plastic cups. We could go and bring some of that stuff in. We can go and make things as fun as possible. And what I'll do is just, first of all, I'm going to throw it open to the whole group if someone wants to put their hand up in this one. What sort of fun things can you do within this space of priming and getting back? I know, Patrick, you showed us a couple of them there, but is there any sort of fun activities that you would think would be suitable to some of the younger ages, maybe?
A simple push-up progression as often as you can. I think when you can get partners together, again, it might not be immediate, right, in our return to contact, but perhaps earlier in our younger ages, that crawl position, the all fours, you could actually have them go on their knees down with one partner, and the other partner can actually maybe be doing a push-up, leaning on their side or on their rib cage. It seems very kind of fundamental, but it gives a perfect elevation to make that push-up a little bit easier, so that the partner can execute the technique of a proper push-up, but it also really engages and forces that partner down bottom to really kind of engage and stabilize and use their core. And of course, they're going to bring their own fun out of any exercise once they're involved with each other and doing partners. So that's a really simple regression for some of our younger athletes that I really like.
Brilliant. Love it. And I can see Nicol smirking away there, so I'm sure you've got something working there. I can see the cogs going, so we might come to you next and just see, is there anything fun that you would like to see happen in this time?
No, I think the coaches on the call will have some experience with it, but just make it enjoyable. Involve the ball where you can. There's natural competitions within all of these things. Who runs fastest, who gets their knees up higher. Like there's just think of those, be cognizant and aware of those things that can help keeping the players engaged, make them count out each other's reps. Have a 30-second push-up, max push-up count. There's loads of little things that I think just adds to it. And that's one of the great things about rugby, isn't it? That it is such a community sport and it is such a participatory sport, and we are able to enjoy that camaraderie, but that little bit of competition that, as you say, makes it a bit of fun.
Couldn't have put it better myself. I suppose, look, we've 2 more questions now just before we wrap up here. What we'll do is Caithriona might come to you on this one, and just give you a second to actually hear it now before I completely throw you under the bus. But in a 60-minute session, what percentage of time should be dedicated to warm up and warm down? And I suppose it's obviously going to be tailored and very specific to what you're doing in that session. But even just as a kind of a general overview of how you might go about tailoring that session in particular.
Thanks, Colm. Yeah, look, it's something we're always cognizant of. The timing when you have an hour and you want to get through as much of the session as you can do, and particularly maybe with some of our younger age groups, they're going to be so keen and eager just to get the ball in hand and be playing, that it's going to be hard almost to get them to slow down for a moment to try and do a warm up. But if you're looking at something between the 10 to 15 minute mark to warm them up, as we've gone through with a lot of this engaged content, some of it can be started individually. So while you're waiting for the rest of the team to tog out onto the pitch, you could have some of those young leaders in your team starting off before the coaches even started the warm-up session. And then some of these primers or these contact drills can be brought in later in the session. So you can almost tailor it to get all of the points that we would need in a warm-up to help protect our players, but done throughout a session so it doesn't look like a 15-minute block at the start. And then I know sometimes the cool down is not everyone's focus either, because once training's over, everyone just wants to get home, and particularly usually in the winter months, everyone wants to get home and get warm again. But even just taking 5 minutes just to slow down, reflect on the session, gives the coaches again a chance to check in on how everyone felt the session went, and before they all head away home.
Yeah, brilliant, Caithriona. And as you say there, from regards that warm down, it's often neglected, and it's hugely important, I suppose, for making sure we can stay connected to our players and understand how they felt in that RPE, that rate of perceived exertion, and then also about how I suppose in these times, this is our opportunity to socialize as well. You know, we can't talk after training, we can't hang around in groups, we can't get in big groups before training. So that's our opportunity to kind of connect in with each other. Look, we'll finish off with one question for Patrick on a slightly more tactical note. This question's coming in from Ian. I think I may have got a text from Ian as well. And he's obviously lining up a marathon at the weekend, but he was asking, what are the benefits of landing on toes instead of soles whenever you're doing the running?
I hate to say coaching cues are often wrong because there's always different ways to get a message across and things like that. But if we just look at force, whether it's absorption or production, we're going to be able to do both. Apply and absorb the most around our midfoot. We don't want to be back on our heel. We don't want to be up on our toes. If we're up on our toes, we're actually going to have to spend a lot of time absorbing before we can redistribute it. And if we're stuck on our heels, then we're just going to be putting a lot of force back through our posterior chain and putting a lot of torque up through the hamstrings and into the low back even. So whether we're talking about accelerating or even a jog or a high speed sprint, if we could stay as close to that midfoot as possible, even often when, say we're going over a squat jump cue, a lot of coaches will often say, land on your toes or be on your toes and be prepared. Really, it's a matter of positioning of the hips and really trying to feel where that midfoot is, because we're going to probably be most reactive off of that midfoot as opposed to the toes.
Folks, from me, I just want to thank all our experts, thank Orla in the back of house as well, and say thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again.